he goes. He's at it again. Did you ever hear such a bleeding racket in all your life?
Yeah, it takes an Irishman to play the pipes.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, everyone, the Alternate History Podcast. It's Dylan back in the host chair of the What If Machine today. And with me, I have a very special guest who has something to say to the good people at home.
Hi, good people.
Yep, it's Chris Coppola. We're officially having an episode. And I'm going to leave Chris to do the real setup, but I just want to say this is kind of the first of an idea that we've had to kind of go back and revisit certain kind of original or old episodes just to kind of try and give a new spin on them, see if we can kind of do things sort of differently with different members of the cast and whatnot. But before I give too much away, I'm going to throw it over to Chris for the big reveal of what exactly it is we're going to be doing today.
So I was sitting down, and we sometimes try and do releases around like anniversaries of things. I actually, this is going to be released on June 5th. So the episode you get next week was recorded before this one, because when I saw when the release was going to be, I was like, no, we need to do a release related to, early June. And for all of our listeners out there, know what happened in early June. So tomorrow, June 6th, is going to be the 10th anniversary of the release of Hearts of Iron 4.
Surprise, everyone. This episode is just going to be me and Chris playing video games for an hour.
Actually, the last one, Call Forward. Wow. Yeah. In the episode that we did record last week, but you will be hearing next week, Dylan does openly challenge me. At the very end. This is why you listen to all of ours at the very end, because I still have a heating pad on from that one. That Dylan, that was the first. I don't think it's a coincidence that they released that game on June 6th.
I sincerely doubt it.
Because what else is at the anniversary of Dylan?
It is the first 1 week anniversary of the movie Pressure being in theaters.
Is it out yet?
Yeah, it came out a couple days ago,
of
when we're recording this.
Yeah, and okay. So I promise we're actually going to get to the history of it. We're talking about D-Day and the decision to basically trust the Allied weather the weather
forecasters, basically, yeah.
That there would be a break in the storm that had initially led to the delay.
Channel coast is socked in with rain and fog. No jump tonight.
From June 5th to June 6th initially, because there was a storm on June 5th. The weather predicted enough of a gap to make tolerable conditions, not tolerable,
not great, good enough,
for the landing. And basically, I'm gonna save everybody out there, take the $15 to $20 you would have spent on a ticket to Pressure, give it to us on Patreon. I'm gonna spoil the ending for you. They actually land, we win, beautiful.
All right, episode over, right?
So, Dylan, talk about okay. Should we talk about the previous episode that was done a little bit, kind of summarize it?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to listen to it, it's only about 35 minutes. They can go listen to it. It's basically the same premise. Yeah, it's episode 5. But basically what we're doing is we're going to examine what would have happened if Eisenhower had basically called off the landing completely for this window. And the reason why that is in play is, fun fact, they'd actually already pushed it back once. They originally planned it for May 1st. But when they decided to basically boost up the size of the landing, they had to kick it back a month because they didn't have enough landing craft in. Long story short, the reason why this June basically 4th to 6th window, a 5th to 7th, this couple day window is chosen is because one, this is a naval and air operation. The beginning of June is when there's going to be a full moon. So they want optimal lighting for the airplanes to be able to hit their targets and land the paratroopers. And it's also high tide.
Low tide.
Well, it's weird because it's basically perfect mid tide. It's high tide, but it's mid tide, so the water's coming in between high and low tide.
Basically,
for the
they wanted
day.
it a little bit out so that they could see the obstacles.
Yeah, and they wanted to be able to ride it in. So that's why early in the morning. That's why this period of June. The next time they're going to be able to do this without a full moon is a couple weeks later, basically like June 19th, 20th.
And
but they're not
by the
going to
way,
have another full moon until early July.
And in the setup to this, I think I made the comment of, because the full moon helped them out so much in actually getting everybody, because they were all over the place.
Although actually, hold on, this is a complete aside, listeners, but those of you who have heard about Overlord, the Nazi zombie movie, talking about a full moon, it would be way more interesting if it was a werewolf Nazi D-Day movie, because it's a full moon.
Okay, now I have to throw this out there. What about the Romanian divisions?
Oh, werewolves versus zombies.
No, werewolves versus vampires.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Sorry. Yeah, werewolves versus vampires.
I don't.
So it's basically Van Helsing World War II edition.
I don't think they had flipped yet.
Anyway. Yeah. Anyway, they hadn't, but anyway. So basically, we're going to say that because of this weather, Eisenhower decides not to go forward with the D-Day landings in early June. So then the next question is, okay, when's the next time that he's going to do it? Well, like I said, without the full moon, you have an opportunity in kind of around the 19th and the 20th. There's only one problem with that, and that is on June 19th, another massive storm weeps through the channel and actually ends up destroying one of the temporary floating harbors they had built, these mulberry harbors, and would have, had they decided to push and go then, would have done a ton of damage.
It's not like they could see into the future and had to choose between like the June 6th and the June 19th. They definitely would pick June 6th because it was marginal, but it wasn't like, it wasn't
horrible. Yeah.
A 40-year storm, I think I saw.
It's like a 40 or 50-year storm event. And so if they had been in the channel trying to land, they would have just been absolutely devastated. So the next time around, you're looking at July. Well, the only problem with this is, the way we see it, even some of the meteorologists and the forecasters talked about this. One of them talked about how having to postpone all the way to July would have been basically unthinkable because there's so much pressure trying to get this done. So if they can't do it in early June, they can't do it in mid-June, what we're going to say is they decide to put the operation on what amounts to an indefinite hiatus because, little backtrack, originally Overlord was called Operation Hammer. You know what a hammer goes with? An anvil. And Operation... I was
going to say nail.
Well, the other thing, yeah. But Hammer was to be accompanied by Anvil, which later became what we would know as Operation Dragoon, which was the naval landing in...
Keep in mind, there are two O's in that. That is not Operation Dragon, keeping with our mythical fighting. No.
Yes. Dragoon. Yeah, no, we're not bringing dragons into this, just Dragoons. Operation Dragoon originally in our timeline took place in mid-August and was basically kind of a mirror counterpart naval invasion of southern France. So in this timeline, what we're going to say is because Normandy is put on an indefinite hiatus because of these multiple attempts at the weather.
I mean, it's put off twice, and, basically nobody can tell you what's going to happen in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Weather-wise. So they decide, you know what? It's already delayed us. The weather has already delayed us twice. We can keep on this 2-week cycle, but we're already thinking about Southern France.
It's going to be time to crap or get off the pot because if you don't land now and you just kind of waffle on it, you lose the ability to reroute some of the logistics to support Dragoon as an alternative, which now it's looking like that's going to be your shot. So that's probably what you're going to want to do, is at least try to move some men and materiel to North Africa to try and support that. So that's what we're going to say happens in this timeline. And I think as a result of that, Dragoon may move up a little bit, not drastically, because obviously we're already sitting on, the end of June, beginning of July. But Dragoon could easily kind of be moved up a couple of weeks to right around the beginning of August, maybe end of July. And so that's going to do some really interesting things, because this turns Dragoon into, instead of kind of the accessory invasion, as much as I hate to say it, this is the kind of tour de force of kind of the third front opening up in World War II. And Chris, one of the things we talked about, we talked about, we've thrown around the new Pressure movie. The other famous thing that people have probably seen from this sort of situation is Band of Brothers. One of the iconic bits of scene from, I think it's like episode 2. It might even be the very beginning of the show. Is where they're sitting on the tarmac waiting to do the jump into D-Day, and you hear the call out, "No jump tonight."
So, as I remember, that's actually at the end of 1.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's at the end of 1. But that's the 101st Airborne talking about this weather delay that, spoiler alert for the movie Pressure, they pushed the invasion off one day to make Overlord happen. Well, because the 101st isn't needed for Overlord anymore, they can be rerouted to the Mediterranean, because one of the nice things about the Airborne is they just need planes. They don't need boats. Boats take longer. Planes are faster. So while, the rest of whatever's going to be moved to support Dragoon is still getting worked out and the ships are kind of embarking, they can, at least sort of circuitously, but they can fly, hop and skip. They can probably hop and skip most of the Airborne, including the 101st, to Corsica, which has already been captured by the Allies in preparation for this new Dragoon on steroids.
And the other thing, just to kind of throw out there as a thought, yes, we have been planning these invasions for a long time. There's kind of the commonly held idea that, how long they spent planning Market Garden? A week.
Yeah.
So these, this is doable because these lighter troops have less logistics to move with them. So it's kind of believable that if you were to actually make the decision in mid-June, you could have a very well-planned integration of them into an operation.
Yeah. And at the very least, even if they don't necessarily have a lot of time in the Med once they get there before they have to execute, there's at least a few days, but military planners have been able to account for them for basically almost a month.
Right.
So they're going to be able to develop sophisticated plans. So we're going to say basically that this new version of Dragoon starts with where do you think the main thrust of the invasion's going to hit on the French coast?
Basically, Marseille.
Yeah.
The advantage of one of the big advantages of there's a couple of advantages of southern France. One, it has been kind of an area of Allied effort, the Mediterranean. The weather is going to be nicer. The other thing is this. When did the Germans occupy Marseille? They did not occupy Marseille.
I was about to say.
In 1940.
Yeah.
They did not.
That's all Vichy.
Right.
Yeah.
Southern France was under the control of Vichy up until, I believe, like 43 in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, is when the Germans were like, okay, Vichy, you can no longer be a thing. We're coming in and taking you over.
Yeah.
That means, that is like late 42, 43. The Germans haven't had the time they did to build beach defenses the way they did up in Normandy.
Well, and they also haven't had as long to occupy from a psychological perspective. So, granted, Vichy France collaborationist from a government perspective, you have to imagine that no matter what kind of sort of French government they are, the actual French people are not going to be super happy watching jackboots wander around.
And you also have an issue of, hey, anybody who was somewhat resistancy
Mm-hmm.
in the German occupied areas, where'd they go?
They all went south.
Yes.
So Marseille, I think, makes a really kind of a logical place. One, because it's close, and also because once they can get a landing, and also from
it's the other, looking at a map of southern France, I think you and I both had this comment of, there's a lot of ports.
Yeah, exactly. Because that was one of the problems with D-Day and then Dragoon is.
Well, the problem with kind of Dieppe is there's only so many ports on the Channel coast.
Well, and that was one of the reasons. One of the reasons why they really wanted Dragoon so hard is because that opens up a logistical operation. Because Normandy, it's got ports, but it doesn't have. They're not dotted all over the place like they are in southern France,
right?
Because you got to think southern France has been seafaring trade since before the Romans. So this is a very optimal area to open up logistics. The other interesting thing that it does is this kind of ties in not quite the same logical way that, landing in Normandy, okay, we're opening up a complete new front to spread the Germans out. But this makes a logical sense along the same veins, but from a different perspective, where this is opening up a new front that's very close to an existing front. Because you know what else happens if D-Day gets called off? Mark Clark becomes the hero of World War II for about a month and a half. Because 2 days before Normandy, Mark Clark takes Rome. And he was fully expecting to have his name just show up in all the papers and be lauded kind of as this hero of the war effort, because he'd just taken, the capital of Italy. And only by the time the news was going to hit the papers, D-Day had already happened, and that's what everybody was talking about. So Mark Clark, I think, and this is just kind of an interesting aside, but I kind of feel like the Italian campaign of World War II is underappreciated. It's the only one Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg haven't bothered to do a series on so far.
They haven't done anything on CBI to best of my knowledge.
True. Yeah. But I mean, of the big three theaters, well, of the big three American theaters, I should say. So, but what I'm getting at is Mark Clark's already going up the boot.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to launch another invasion, that means instead of running from opposite ends like you would from Normandy, you're running essentially in parallel, which gives you opportunities for bouncing tactics off of each other, pinning maneuvers, things like that. So I think one of the things that we talked about once the landing in Marseille happens is, you're going to have the airborne, and from Corsica, you've got a lot of range in terms of how far you can take paratroopers. The Allies are going to want to, once they secure Marseille, take advantage and start pushing into France. So we can easily see, kind of like how one of the 101st things, I think this was the 101st, but I know one of the advanced goals of some of the paratroopers was to try and do early security, or at least attempt at like Carentan, which is inland from the coast of Normandy. Kind of a similar thing here, where they could be paradropped as far up as like Avignon to try and do some advanced security scouting disruption work while the main troops land in Marseille.
And secure choke points.
Exactly.
Secure choke points. The other thing that the British airborne did was to hold bridges to stop German tanks from being able to reach.
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly where I'm going, because the other nice thing about this part of France is, once you start getting further north into France, you start running into a little trouble with the Alps as you have to curl around towards Germany, but they're not there yet. But they do have to worry about, they have all these ports, but they need to secure inland, logistical networks. Well, you know what runs right up the middle of this part of France? A giant river, the Rhone. You know what's great for logistics for thousands of years? A giant river. So, the focus, I think, initially is going to be up the river once they secure Marseille, Avignon, maybe Montpellier, and kind of start. I think their first natural area advance is kind of going up the river because that's an easy way to get supplies.
Mhm.
But the next thing they're going to be looking at, especially with something like the airborne, is okay, now we've got kind of the Rhone River Valley kind of secured. We've got our beachhead there. We've got some maneuvering. Well, what are we going to do with the airborne to try and do choke points? Well, if you start looking over at what Mark Clark is doing, because he captures, captures Rome in June. He captures Florence in mid-August. He's moving up the boot. Well, what you also might want to do is maybe secure, speaking of choke points, Chris, the Alps end just before you get to the Mediterranean coast. And there's a French town that's right there. It's very nice.
Nice.
Nice. So the next one of the other things we think is that the airborne also paired airdrops into Nice, one to open up another port, and two to secure a choke point, because basically if you can control Nice up to the Alps, it's really not that much. It's only like 20, 30 miles, I think, between the Mediterranean coast and the Alps right there. You've essentially cut off the only non-Alpine route for Italian and German forces until you get to, is it the Ardennes forest? Like where the Maginot Line is in central France, kind of in Alsace-Lorraine, basically?
Yeah, famously, Maginot Line, not in the Ardennes. That turned into a problem.
But you get but that area, once it opens up and widens out, you don't really have a good, easy logistical way to move troops and your elephants and all your Carthaginian troops, except for going through the Alps. So you essentially bottleneck huge chunks of the German and Italian armies that are defending in Italy. So all they can do is back up into Milan or try and go through Austria.
Them where they might very quickly run as far north as they can and just protect those passes versus trying to fight Mark Clark for every step he's going to get and wind up getting surrounded.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you could very much see, at least big chunks of central and kind of northwestern Italy, start to be kind of linked up with this sort of Provence theater, this, southern French theater, by kind of the turning of 44 to 45.
Oh,
maybe even earlier than that.
Like September-ish. September.
You think September? I was trying to be generous. I think September might be a bit much, but I would say October, maybe November for sure. The other interesting thing,
if they don't do what you're about to say.
Yeah, and that's the question, is there's basically two ways that you can go from southern France. You can only go so far north before I think north is kind of out, at least immediately, because you need to build up supplies before you can try to hook around the Alps, because that's really hard offensive territory. I mean, the Austrians and the Italians learned it in World War I with the 768 battles of the Isonzo, where fighting in the mountains is just kind of hard. But if you go east, you can hook around the Alps, go through Nice, get into Italy. If you go west, the French plains flatten out into the wine country, and you can start getting to the Atlantic. And I think that, whether the Allies go through Nice and start to bottle up Italy immediately, or go the other way, I think those are the two ways they go first. They go west. I actually suspect they go west to Bordeaux earlier once they bottled up Nice, because then they can just fortify it, make it the anvil against Mark Clark's hammer.
I think there's something else to think about. Here comes my second thing. September 1944 is when the Germans start launching rockets at Greece.
I had that thought.
So in our timeline, kind of one of the impetuses behind Market Garden in September was to kind of finish off this whole thing in the Low Countries and take over the launching pad, the launch sites that actually allowed them to reach.
That could reach into the UK. Yeah.
If we are looking at this operation, because kind of what we talked about first was they're actually going to leave a lot of the troops in Great Britain thinking and wondering how, trying to get them to the continent, either through a landing on the French Atlantic coast or just keep them there and keep threatening to the Germans so that they keep their troops up north.
Mm-hmm.
If V2s start landing in London, is southern France, do they just put something ashore in northern France? How does that change the calculus? Because if now they're making another like Channel Normandy landing, maybe Bordeaux isn't as important as we might think, because there's that political pressure to take the Low Countries.
Well, so I think they would probably actually, to be honest with you, happen roughly at the same time. Okay. Because southern France, one, it's Vichy territory. So like we talked about, there's more French resistance. You have like British SAS, you have paratroopers available in a relatively closer range in a relatively less fortified area. So it's conceivable that even if they don't have, Allied forces completely knocking on the door to Bordeaux, they're at least kind of getting close by September-ish. And if you, land the paratroopers there again, if you have some SAS in the 101st or whoever, with some French resistance, Bordeaux is important because unless you can get a port on the Atlantic, you still don't have a really convenient way to link the North African theater and the UK, logistically speaking. Everything basically has to be routed either super far out into the Atlantic in, open waters, or you've got to route it through the Western Hemisphere. So I think once they have the operation for Bordeaux ready to go, then they, because the V1s kind of start hitting and they're like, oh crap, we've got to get some stuff going. They do essentially two operations. They do a big one in Normandy with most of the troops that are left in the UK, but they also do another contingent because they know Bordeaux, the plan is Bordeaux is going to be secure enough by the time they get there. There's going to be another contingent. I'm going to say this is primarily British, whereas the Americans are primarily going to be in Normandy. And I think the HMS Eleanor of Aquitaine, or some ship like it, is going to roll into Bordeaux, newly secured by the Allies, and the English are going to not be able to resist the little thumb at the nose of the French, who they just are helping save, to get back their territory from 700 years before. Chris had 2 bombs. I had to throw my 1. Not nearly as realistic, but very entertaining. But I think by the time they have to do a Normandy landing,
given the importance of the pre-French, like they specifically forbid that.
Well, Eleanor of Aquitaine was French. They can't get mad at it.
Okay.
Technically Aquitanian, but we're not going to worry about that. So anyway, I think probably both are going to happen at the same time.
Okay.
Because I think the acquisition of Bordeaux serves a very different logistical priority from like a Normandy Low Countries landing. But they are both very important objectives. Now, I think, I don't know about you. I wonder if they still land at Normandy or if they pick somewhere else.
I think one of the questions becomes, we've been talking a lot about what the Allies are doing and what the Allies are thinking. I think it's worth questioning, are the Germans reacting? In other words,
yeah.
Like,
so I think,
how well defended is some of the old Atlantic Wall, and how easy would it be to actually take another stab at Dieppe or one of those other actual ports that's going to let you hit the ground running?
Yeah, and I think if you say start with a heavy Allied push towards Bordeaux, I think you could very easily see parts of the German first at least start heading down to try and fight off, to keep them from getting more north into France, because that's what they're worried about, to try and at least kind of wall them off towards the sea, which would potentially free up.
Almost one of the things that the Allies want the Germans to do is try and move your troops by road.
Yeah.
Because then they become very, very easy to get blown apart.
Well, and even without the difficulties in the actual transport of the troops, what this does is this gives the Allies pretty much all the cards at the table, because the Germans have to pick. They're going to lose territory somewhere, so they have to do something, which means the Germans are stuck in reactive mode no matter what they do. So the Allies can kind of keep playing this game, even if all of the first doesn't move. There's a decent chunk of it that probably does move towards France. Well, that frees up parts of the Atlantic Wall. So I think maybe Cherbourg, maybe they even try and go for a Low Countries or near the Low Countries. Like maybe they go back to Dunkirk, kind of right on the border.
I think they try and do maybe a Calais Dunkirk. I don't think they do Antwerp.
No.
Because of the estuary issues.
I think Calais or Dunkirk makes more sense. It also gives more of a PR win for the Allies, especially if you think of them in light of having V1 rockets. They need a PR win. So being able to say we retook Dunkirk and Calais, we've kind of avenged the humiliation of the beginning of the war. And now we're taking it back and putting the Germans in the position we were in, basically. So I think that's kind of a believable, and also that offers up ports that Normandy didn't have.
Right.
So then I think you get into some really interesting issues of, well, the Allies are in Calais and Dunkirk. They have ports. They can start.
When like September, October?
Yeah, I think probably right around the turn of September to October, because you're closing out on, especially in northern France. In southern France, you've got a little more time, but you're closing out as winter sets in into real, like, hard operational movement.
The question would be, I think the objective would be, can we unify these disparate little footholds?
Yeah. Well, I think once you get to October, November, because basically in the Southern Front, you pretty much have, all but like 2 months out of the year, maybe, where you can do real military operations.
Probably do the Nice Front, I guess,
unifies.
Would be a winter idea.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they make sure they fortify their gains on the continent in Calais, Dunkirk, gradually push out as much as they can, because obviously you can kind of stagger and shift supplies up slowly. But most of the action is going to be on the Southern Front because you have more warm weather time to maneuver. So I think you could potentially, have a free France liberated. Even if Paris isn't liberated, I think you could see enough of France by the time the winter sets in to have, a liberated government in Marseille, Bordeaux, Nantes, even, somewhere that's not Paris, because they can't quite get in. But that's the next card on the table as soon as things warm up.
So I promise I'm going to bring all of this around.
Yeah.
You talked about the fall of Florence, and looking at that, it reminded me a lot of what happened in Paris in our timeline, which is the armies got close.
Yeah.
And the resistance rose up.
Yeah.
Even though the army was like, don't rise, because we do not want to fight in your city.
Yeah.
Resistance did it anyway. And by the way, maybe we're going to talk about what I'm about to talk about. Going to take it there anyway. Warsaw. I always find it really interesting what happens in August of 44, because the French resistance rises in Paris, and literally the Free French, like, I believe, Second Armored, completely changes the plan, tells Eisenhower what he can do with his plan, and goes to liberate Paris because the resistance rose up.
Yeah.
Same thing happened kind of in Florence. The Italian resistance rose up, took the city. The American army came in to protect the city. Something very, very different happened in Warsaw.
Yeah. Yes. That's putting it mildly.
And I think it's a really interesting, like, because they happen at exactly
At the same time. Yeah.
It's a really interesting view of, like, hey, why didn't Zhukov have to be such a great diplomatic? Because he had no allies to actually deal with. What we're talking about is basically the Soviet Union launched Operation Bagration actually about when the second Normandy landing was canceled. So it was like mid-June. And it just takes out the entire, like, German Central Army.
Yeah.
Done. They're advancing on Warsaw. They are literally on the Vistula, on the other side of the river from the city of Warsaw. And the Polish resistance rises up. Exact same thing the French resistance did. Exact same thing the Italian resistance did. The Soviet army handled that very differently.
Yeah.
What did they do?
They basically just replaced one set of jackboots for another and one caliber of bullets for another. From the Poles' perspective.
They sat there.
Yeah.
They sat there.
Yeah.
And rather than do anything to actually, like, assist the resistance in the city of Warsaw,
they just let them do their thing and peter out and get crushed.
The Germans were out of the city. The Germans were running.
Yeah.
And the Soviet Union said, oh, we ran out of logistics.
Whoopsies.
And just sat there and let the Germans destroy the city of Warsaw.
Yeah.
So I'm interested if, like,
well, so that's a good point. I think, I don't know if the Allies are close enough to Paris by the time that happens, but I wonder if essentially the Warsaw uprising occurs, like it does in our timeline. And then the Allies are close enough. And, also in the scenario we're postulating, there's probably by then going to be some sort of rump Free French government on the mainland.
Mm-hmm. I mean, by the way, Free French troops were a major part of the original Dragoon landing.
Yeah, but I mean in the sense of they have administrative control over the civilian machinery of the southern 2/3 of France, basically. In this timeline, maybe the Warsaw uprising happens the way it does in our timeline. Paris doesn't happen quite as quickly, but it happens 2-3 weeks a month afterwards.
Around September, October.
Yes. And then the Allies, having seen what could happen on the Eastern Front, they say, screw it. We're going to go 0 to 60. Just go for Paris.
Literally, the way it happened in our timeline is the French resistance kind of used this as a cudgel almost on the Allied armies to say, no, you need to actually take Paris.
Yeah.
Don't leave the Germans here with, like, explosives to take.
Yeah, and all this other stuff.
They wanted to. There were
100%. Yes. Yeah.
So kind of a rising in Paris in, like, November-ish to kind of incentivize the Allies to pay attention.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm envisioning, because they can use the counterpoint of, well, you don't want Warsaw to happen in Paris, so hurry up, get your butts in gear.
And also, hey, just thinking about this, which of the Allied fronts is going to take Paris? Is it going to be the, like, northern France? Is it going to be southern France? Or, by the way, would that not be a wonderful place to meet?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that's kind of, that's one part of it. And I think also with this sort of meeting in Paris, you know what this also does? If they rush straight for Paris, you know what they probably haven't gotten to yet, that probably still has a decent amount of German troops in it, is Brittany.
Huh?
So in the rush to get to Paris, what they kind of accidentally on purpose do is cut off whatever's left of.
Which they do in our timeline too, actually, kind of
Yeah.
swinging south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what, basically, especially if you have more of the first army heading south, some of that is going to get caught up where it might not have been our timeline because it's going to get basically wedged apart. So you have kind of a giant encirclement in Brittany that they can sort of push into the sea. And then you can go east like we did in our timeline. But you also can go a little bit easier up from south to north.
Okay.
Because, the Italian campaign's probably going to be mopped up, like we talked about, a little bit quicker in this timeline because they have more strength meeting them from the southern French side.
Well,
so
we kind of talked about that being like a November-ish thing to do.
Yeah. So Clark is able basically to kind of get forces together, and the rest of the Italian campaign commander is able to get forces together kind of on the Italian-Austrian border, just past Venice, so that when the springtime comes, because they can't really do a whole lot in the winter unless they want to head south through the Balkans, but you get into some of the same messy terrain problems after a certain point. But either way, what they want to do is they want to build up the biggest jackhammer they can get with what they've got in the south, so that when the weather warms up in 45, they can come at them from two directions, plus the Soviets.
So come north into kind of
north
Austria?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. You kind of go around and skirt the Alps that way and come through the other edge of it. And then you kind of go up into, Berchtesgaden, you can get into the German Low Country. Southern Germany, not the Low Country, but once you get through the Alps, it flattens out, and then you're basically driving a dagger not into the soft underbelly of the Axis, but into the soft underbelly of Germany, literally itself.
So I think it's interesting to think that, like, with what you're suggesting, Berchtesgaden and Bavaria might be because here's the other thing that. Gee, okay, I guess this might be a Band of Brothers centric episode of ours. Because where did they end the war?
Berchtesgaden.
Why?
Because they were racing to beat the Soviets there, right?
No,
that's a different place. But
the reason they were there, the reason they rushed into Berchtesgaden and southern Germany, Bavaria, the Alps, that is where the Werwolfs were going.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. I forgot all about those.
But by the way, let's be very clear, just because, okay, no, this is definitely our mythical creature Band of Brothers crossover. What is a werewolf?
Well, if you have read The Man with the Iron Heart, like I have, the classic Turtle Dove one-off novel, basically the werewolves were the sort of last-ditch German.
I also enjoyed that my German accent was good enough to let Dylan know exactly what I was talking about.
Yes.
Not werewolves, werewolves.
Yeah. Basically, it's the idea for like a last-ditch German guerrilla resistance in the event that the overall Nazi regime was going to fall. They were basically going to retreat into the Alps, into Austria, almost like imagine kind of the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War, kind of these hit and run, move through passes, this kind of guerrilla resistance war.
I've also heard it compared to like Iraq.
Yeah, that's another great one. Yeah, mm-hmm. This kind of resistance bandit. What's the phrase? God, I'm trying to think of it. Asymmetrical warfare kind of situation.
I want to call them francs-tireurs just because I know nothing will piss off a German more than being called a franc-tireur.
Yeah, right. Yeah, something like that. So that's what Chris is talking about. And if you have an Allied army that can move up quicker, you kind of remove that possibility to a certain extent because, well, if your Werewolf plan depends on you being able to retreat to the Alps and hide out if the government in Berlin falls, that's very hard when most of the Alps is speaking a combination of American English, British English, and French. You can still go to Switzerland, but whatever. So I think that sets up, that doesn't change, I think, the long-term results of 1945 all that much in terms of the long game.
Well, here's the other thing I think is important. So you got kind of, not like, you don't really have much in the Low Countries in terms of liberation, but you do have kind of Italy like at the turn of 44, 45.
Yeah.
The first question I have for you is, Watch on the Rhine. Is there the Watch on the Rhine? The Operation Watch on the Rhine was a name, the German name for what? Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to think of it. I was like, Ardennes Forest, da-da-da. Yeah.
Am I really better? Okay, this is going to become a thing if I'm better at German than you are.
I am open about the fact that I spreche only the most minute of Deutsch.
However, is there, what happens with those? Because everybody, that's a pretty open argument as to, like, would the Germans have been better using those troops somewhere else, using them in a different way, rather than like throwing them out in the open and letting them get cut off? And by the way, I do have another plug. Like, more people need to talk about the Bulge and the Kaiserschlacht at the same time.
Yes.
More people need to,
because they really are basically. Where do you think Hitler got the idea from?
Anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I mean, given sort of the way Germany's going to be in this timeline, whether it happens in the Ardennes and.
Well, we haven't gone into the Low Countries. So it doesn't make any sense to try and go to Antwerp. You have Antwerp. You can walk to Antwerp. Doesn't matter. You're not fighting.
Yeah. So I can maybe see it as being kind of an alternative last ditch push south to try and take back, Austria, because that's German territory.
Try and break the corridor.
Yeah.
Through to Brittany.
Yeah, that's something like that. Maybe I was trying to decide whether I wanted to go with like trying to push against Berchtesgaden in Austria or try and push against like Dunkirk, Calais, and get to Brittany.
I don't think we're there yet. I think we're into the kind of into
Venice,
the Italian section of it. We're into that, but we're not over.
We're not there yet. Yeah,
over the Alps are like March 45.
When will then be now? Soon. Yeah. But no, I think that's actually a really good one. I like that because, there may be enough German forces left that the Allies may not be particularly cared about pushing too hard into Brittany while they get their stuff sorted because they want to just end the whole thing. So yeah, maybe there's a last ditch push against the sort of Normandy corridor.
Because that's kind of what they were trying to do in the actual Ardennes, was to split kind of the British in the north from the Americans in the south.
Yeah. That's an interesting. I like that. I think, and I think that's both realistic enough, but at the same time wacky enough that that's exactly the kind of thing Hitler's going to go for.
The other thing I think is important, and I'm going to take a shot at the AI slop you put together.
I didn't put it together. Google did.
I think the important thing here is the Allies are close to Germany in February 1945.
Yeah.
Why does February 1945 matter? Yalta.
Oh, yeah. I always forget the timing of that. Yeah.
Yalta is like, there's a real question before this, kind of the shot. What the AI said was, oh, well, the Allies aren't going to make it far enough into Germany to actually like stop, push up against
stop the Red Army from coming in. Yeah.
But the thing is, where was the border set between East and West Germany? It was set at Yalta.
Yeah.
In February 45, basically, the Yalta Conference drew the line and said, this is going to be the Allied zones of control. This is going to be the Soviet zones of control. Yeah. And thinking about like what the United States, what the Soviet Union had already taken, they hadn't gotten much further into Germany, especially if you look at the modern definition of Germany and don't think about what Germany was before the war.
Yeah.
Because it's now, a lot of it's Poland.
Yeah.
Don't need to talk about that. But like, Berlin's pretty close to the Polish border. They're not there yet. The Allies may not be in Germany, but at least we're all close enough that there's an argument to be made that the border is going to look very similar.
Oh yeah.
I think another interesting thing to think about is, which of the control sections was not delineated at Yalta?
It's the French.
The French, because the French hadn't done anything.
Yeah, but in this timeline,
that's the thing. That's, I think it's they can justify it more. They're more of an equal partner, I think, in this timeline, and that's important.
Yeah, I think so too, because going through the south of France gives them essentially an extra 6 months of actually having a government that builds legitimacy, contributes to the war effort, yada yada yada. So I think it's very interesting to imagine them, one, to imagine them having more of a seat at the table at Yalta, and two, my favorite story about Yalta is, Stalin having KGB agents secretly collect everyone's bathroom product to try and clean health concerns, and just him trying to figure out whatever's going on with Charles de Gaulle on top of Winston Churchill and FDR at Yalta is too good not to think about.
I hope they were thinking about the other leaders, because, like, I can look at the pictures and tell you Roosevelt's not.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, he's not doing so great. But it is an interesting thing. So yeah, I can totally see, a more formal French, occupation zone, and then am I remembering correctly, they also did East and West Berlin like that too? Did they have separate zones in Berlin?
That the Soviets basically said, if you want to hand part of what you have to the French, we don't have a problem with that. That's what wound up happening.
Well, and that makes things interesting. One, because the Soviets would perceive the French, at the negotiation table as more of a equal partner / opponent, competitor, whatever you want to call it. But also, I don't know that the formal borders would change, but that makes the dynamics in East and West Berlin a little bit different, because now the Soviets would essentially see it as a 3-on-1 diplomatic proposition, even if they control roughly the same amount of territory.
So here's the other thing I think is kind of interesting, thinking through what we're talking about now, not to threaten sequels or anything. The French resistance has played the French resistance is why France is important in this.
Yeah.
If you look at kind of post-war France and look at who was a big part of the French resistance, they're communist. So I think that also plays a really interesting way, part of the Soviets looking at this and saying, well, you know what?
Yeah, maybe there's some opportunity here.
Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world
to have the French more at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's really interesting too.
Those parts, by the way, Who's ever heard of the French flipping sides?
Insert John Kerry joke. Um, so and that's actually a really interesting point. And that maybe this is a good place to end this on, since we're talking about kind of the post-war conference.
No.
No, I just mean this episode. Maybe this changes the tenor of the Cold War, at least in the early stages, because rather than a sort of, like now we think about it as the Iron Curtain just being this blanket wall between East and West, maybe in this scenario, it's more of a chain link fence in that it's a wall, but it's got holes in it. It's kind of porous. There's opportunities for both sides to go in and out, because just like how, the Soviets are going to be looking at, the prevalence of communists in the French resistance, the French at the same time are potentially going to be looking at, say, the Czechs, for example, who were very, very cordial with the French before the war, as maybe a counter opportunity.
You know who they're going to be looking at? The Poles.
Yeah. So it's this kind of interesting kind of tit for tat back and forth.
Because,
it's more of a chessboard and less of a.
That's the really interesting thing is, so basically, like at Yalta and Potsdam, the reconstituted nations of Eastern Europe, especially Czechoslovakia and Poland, were reorganized as basically popular front governments. Like the communists were in them, but they were not.
They didn't control them officially.
Right. And I think that might be an interesting early opportunity for some other changes.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. So you have a much more, I guess, kind of unsettled, but still frosty Cold War. Like everybody knows it's going to be a thing, but in this timeline, because of the nature of all these reconstituted governments with the extra communist influence from the French resistance fighters, maybe even for 5-10 years after the war's done, nobody quite knows how this landscape's really going to look. Whereas, especially in Eastern Europe, after 45, 47, 48, maybe, everybody kind of knows which way the wind's blowing. Mm-hmm. But, with a more uncertain, both, French government and also a more openly popular front, and less of a like popular front as a literal front for the communists, with those kind of governments, assuming you have any kind of reasonably actual elections, any kind of change takes 2 or 3 election cycles to really get to. So you're not really going to start to see a true solidifying of the Cold War lines until kind of the mid-late 50s.
Okay.
I think just kind of, no details, but just kind of because of the nature of these sort of elections, you're looking at maybe the beginning of the hardening of the Cold War being in kind of the mid 50s rather than kind of like 48, 49.
I think it's a little sooner, but I think it's still an interesting. And the other thing,
yeah.
Western European integration.
Well, so
France does not feel like they've been cheated. One, de Gaulle might not be as de Gaulle.
Yeah,
might integrate better into NATO, and also what does a stronger, deeper French legitimacy do to the coal and steel community?
Yeah,
and then everything that comes from that.
And speaking of changes in government, if you don't have D-Day when D-Day happens, if it becomes more of an ancillary, secondary operation later, does Ike run in 52? You might have someone completely different. Whether there's a general who runs for one of the parties, does Doug MacArthur come back for his vengeance? Or is it, because we didn't even talk about who would be put in charge of, the Dragoon planning as opposed to the Overlord planning and things like that. Right. That's a whole interesting conversation in and of itself. Without getting too politically in the weeds, I can see names like George Marshall, because he's going to be the one instituting the Marshall Plan. I can see his name being a very interesting one in the early 50s if Ike's not in the picture. But that's just one example. That's a whole ball game we haven't even touched on.
I mean, if you have a different structure in France,
mm-hmm.
and if you have basically no fighting kind of in the Low Countries,
mm-hmm.
what does the Marshall Plan look? The Marshall Plan is
it's going to look different. Yeah.
Right.
So,
and,
but
your whole does Eisenhower even run in 52 with the question of like, well, hey, is there a Korean War
mm-hmm.
that makes MacArthur still relevant? Or also, is there a Korean War that like gives him the opportunity to yell and scream about using nuclear weapons and scare everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of that is kind of dominoes that we haven't even kind of touched on. So I think it's really it's one of those things that when you start getting into it, you think, oh, okay, Overlord doesn't happen. There's not going to be that much that's going to be different. Like the Allies are still going to win. And then you start looking on kind of the knock-ons past that. And that's where things become really interesting.
We still kept like the borders of the occupation zones in Germany basically changed. But all of these other little changes.
Mm-hmm. It's the tapestry that changes, not necessarily the individual thread.
But no. You have to say tapestry right.
What, Bayou? Sorry, what?
Last Crusades.
Tapestry.
Yes, with that horrible accent.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's going to wrap it up for this one. Chris, do you have any final thoughts now that you've made me pull out my terrible Sean Connery accent?
I mean, there's going to be another terrible Sean Connery accent on this. So.
Oh, I do.
Do you want to talk about our Redux, like, weird image of Scotch whiskey?
So we did have one thing, because Band of Brothers obviously came up a lot during this, and one of the recurring things in Band of Brothers is Lewis Nixon in the show. There's several episodes of him kind of bragging about his favorite kind of whiskey, hiding it, wandering through a Dutch town and destroying a couple of shops looking for it, blah blah blah. And it's German. Was it German? I couldn't remember.
That's my favorite episode.
I have not been rewatched the show in a while.
About his wife taking the dog in the divorce.
That's right. Yeah, she took my dog in the divorce. Not even her dog.
It's my dog.
So we joke that VAT 69 was going to be a thing still because Nixon, rather than being in Normandy, was going to be in France. And we we had to look up where VAT 69 was from. And then we realized VAT 69 is made in Scotland. So still going to be a little tricky to find in mainland Europe. But we fixed Lewis's problem. Our theory was that when the 101st takes Avignon in the Dragoon landings in this timeline, and they get basically replaced so that they can be, relegated to some other operation, they get replaced by, I forget which regiment it is, but I know it was the Highlanders.
Yes.
And, Lewis is in intelligence and also American cigarettes. Gotta love that Virginia tobacco. So Nixon manages to secure a swap to secure his supply of VAT 69 for the rest of the operation by trading with the Scottish Highlanders, who are from where VAT 69 is made, for American cigarettes from Marlboro and Lucky Strike and all those guys for his favored Scottish whiskey. Just when you thought we couldn't shoehorn another Band of Brothers reference into this episode. So that's pretty much it from me, everybody. Chris, you got anything else?
Not particularly.
All right. Well, as we always say on A Fork in Time, if you should happen to come across a fork in the road of time, what should you do?
Check the weather.
Yes. All right, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.